If someone told me, drunk confessing my massive crush to my ruthless boss would end up in me finding the love of my life, I would have fainted in disbelief. The Lyra Media Tower was a shard of ice and ambition piercing the city skyline. Its mirrored glass facade reflected the world but gave nothing back, a perfect monument to the man who ruled from its penthouse apex. Inside, the air was cool, filtered, and silent but for the hushed click of heels on polished marble and the whisper of ambition. This was the kingdom of Victor Hale, and its atmosphere was perpetually glacial. Victor, at 38, was the undisputed sovereign of this realm. Known throughout the industry and the tabloids as the Ice King, the title was earned not just for his sharp, silver-blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sea, but for his demeanor. He was a study in controlled perfection. His suits were charcoal and obsidian, tailored with surgical precision, never a thread out of place. His voice was a low, measured baritone that could lower the temperature in a boardroom by 10 degrees. He valued data over drama, results over relationships, and silence over what he considered meaningless chatter. He was not cruel, merely efficient, and his expectations were a high, unscalable wall that few of his employees ever managed to climb. His office was a testament to this philosophy. Sparsely decorated, it featured a vast, minimalist desk of pale oak, a single sleek bookshelf holding industry reports and leather-bound classics, and a breathtaking, and somewhat terrifying, panoramic view of the city. There were no personal photos, no frivolous knickknacks. It was a place of work, a command center, and it suited its occupant perfectly. The human sun that threatened to melt the frost from Victor's windows arrived in the form of one Julian Reyes, the newly appointed, 29-year-old head of marketing. Where Victor was quiet intensity, Julian was vibrant noise. He was a splash of primary color in the monochrome hallway. His smile was a frequent and genuine event. His laugh, a rich, unfettered sound, echoed from meeting rooms and made staid accountants glance up from their spreadsheets with startled smiles. And his wardrobe. Victor had, on more than one occasion, found himself mentally cataloging it with a kind of horrified fascination. There was the mustard-yellow blazer Julian wore with sincere pride. The forest green trousers paired with cherry-red sneakers. A shirt with a subtle, swirling pineapple pattern. He was a walking, talking exclamation mark in a world of periods. Victor found him professionally competent but personally exhausting. And, a fact he confessed to no one, especially not himself, undeniably attractive. There was an energy to Julian, a raw, intelligent passion that was as irritating as it was intriguing. Unfortunately, their first major Monday strategy meeting was a perfect microcosm of their dynamic. Julian, bursting with ideas, had commandeered the screen, his presentation a riot of bold fonts, dynamic graphs, and, Victor winced, strategically placed GIFs. So, the data shows our engagement drops off a cliff after 7 p.m., Julian explained, pacing with an electric energy that made the polished conference table feel like a stage. My thought is we don't fight it, we own it. We create the Lyra Late Night Wind Down. Curated playlists, short story podcasts, ambient visuals. We become the brand that ushers people into a peaceful night, not the one screaming for their attention. The room, usually somnolent, was buzzing. Heads were nodding. The head of digital was already scribbling notes. Victor, seated at the head of the table, steepled his fingers. His expression was unreadable. A wind down, he repeated, his voice flat. You want to invest company resources in telling our audience to go to sleep. Julian's grin didn't falter. I want to invest company resources in being the last brand they interact with before they do. It's about association, sir. Trust. Comfort. He clicked to the next slide, which featured a cartoon moon wearing headphones. Victor's eye twitched, almost imperceptibly. The financial projections are solid, Victor stated, glancing at the packet in front of him. He had to admit, the numbers were compelling. Julian's previous campaigns had already boosted key metrics by double digits. The man was, infuriatingly, a profit-generating phenomenon. They are, Julian agreed, his confidence not arrogance, but a genuine belief in his work. We're not just selling ad space, we're building an ecosystem. Victor dismissed the meeting with a curt nod. As the room emptied, Julian lingered, gathering his things. A good presentation, Reyes, Victor said, the praise delivered like a clinical diagnosis. Thanks, Mr. Hale. I think the moon really sold it, Julian replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. Victor merely looked at him, a long, cool stare that made lesser men stammer apologies. Julian just smiled wider, gave a cheerful little wave, and bounced out of the room, leaving behind a faint scent of citrus and a lingering aura of disruption. Victor remained seated, the silence of the room settling back over him like a familiar blanket. He looked out the wall of windows at his city, orderly and predictable from this height. Julian Reyes was neither. He was a variable, an anomaly, a human sunbeam insistently shining into the carefully controlled climate of Victor's world, and Victor wasn't sure whether he wanted to close the blinds or step into the light. Victor Hale's avoidance of Julian Reyes was not a passive act. It was a meticulously executed corporate strategy. He had navigated hostile takeovers and multi-billion-dollar mergers with less tactical precision than he applied to simply not being in the same room as his head of marketing. It began with his daily schedule, a document managed by a small team of assistants who treated it with the gravity of a state secret. Victor had subtly, yet irrevocably, altered its rhythms. His morning coffee run to the executive kitchen was now timed for 8:15 a.m., a full 15 minutes before Julian's known arrival time of 8:30, which was usually announced by a cheerful, echoing morning, all, down the hallway. Victor's path to meetings now took circuitous routes, avoiding the marketing department's open-plan idea pit, a space that seemed to vibrate with a different energy than the rest of the floor. From his office, Victor could sometimes hear the cadence of Julian's voice through the walls, animated, persuasive, punctuated by laughter from his team. It was an auditory assault on his preferred ambience of tomb-like quiet. But the true battleground was email. Julian's electronic communications were a daily test of Victor's resolve. They were explosions of color and enthusiasm in his otherwise monochrome inbox. Where other department heads used subject lines like Q3 budget review or board meeting agenda, Julian's were a festival of absurdity. The Sunset Campaign Edition Artist Palette Sparkles Sunrise. Sparkle Thinking. The new influencer push Dizzy Thinking Face Chart with Upward Trend. Brain Dump Face with Stuck Out Tongue and Winking Eye Electric Light Bulb. The Metro Takeover Project. Victor would stare at them, his cursor hovering over the delete button, a muscle in his jaw feathering. Opening one was like being verbally hugged by a golden retriever that had also consumed a thesaurus. Hey Victor, hope you're having a productive Monday. Attached are the prelim mock-ups for the Metro campaign. The team absolutely killed IT in the brainstorm today, seriously, brought tears to my eyes, they are so good. We're leaning into a your commute, your canvas vibe, very interactive, very bold, very us. Let me know your thoughts when you have a sec. No rush. Best. Julian. P.S. The analytics on the Winddown campaign are IN and they are Rocket Crescent Moon. Victor's own replies were masterpieces of minimalist rebuke. Julian. *, the mock-ups are adequate. Please ensure the final versions are compliant with the brand's typography guide. See section 4.2 font weights. The postscript is not a professional form of communication. VH. Yet, for all the irritation, the undeniable truth was this. Since Julian Reyes had taken the helm of marketing, the division's profitability had skyrocketed by 38%. His campaigns, for all their emojis and exclamation points, were not just creative, they were lethally effective. They tapped into a cultural zeitgeist that Victor's data-driven, shadow and silence approach could identify but never truly embody. This created a silent, furious conflict within Victor. He would sit in his sterile office, reviewing the quarterly reports, the cold, hard numbers a stark contrast to the man who had generated them. The revenue charts were beautiful, a steep, satisfying climb north. He should have been elated. Instead, he was deeply annoyed. It was illogical. The man was our asset. A valuable, profit-generating asset. So why did the mere sight of that canary yellow blazer through his office window feel like a personal provocation? One afternoon, Victor was reviewing a contract when a burst of laughter from the marketing pit pulled his focus. He glanced up. Julian was standing by a colleague's desk, gesturing wildly as he acted out some story, his entire body engaged in the narrative. He threw his head back and laughed, a sound so genuine and unself-conscious it seemed to warp the very air around him. For a fleeting, treacherous second, Victor wondered what it would be like to be the cause of that laugh, instead of its reluctant audience. He immediately shut down the thought, his expression hardening into its familiar frost. He turned his chair pointedly away from the window, back to the predictable, orderly lines of his contract. He preferred the shadows, the silence, the control. But on the edge of his awareness, like a stubborn patch of sunlight on a cold floor, the sparkle persisted. The annual Lyra Media Gala was less a party and more a corporate coronation, a meticulously orchestrated display of power, wealth, and influence. For Victor Hale, it was a necessary evil, a 6-hour exercise in performative sociability that he would have gladly traded for a root canal. A root canal, at least, involved anesthesia and a valid reason to be silent. The night began, as it always did, with Victor standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a tumbler of neat Macallan in hand, watching the city lights blink on below. He was already dressed in his uniform for the evening, a Tom Ford tuxedo so impeccably tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a sculpted second skin. The black wool was a void, the satin lapels a sharp, severe slash. He was the Ice King preparing to survey his frozen kingdom, and the thought filled him with a profound sense of ennui. Across the city, in an apartment vibrant with art, plants, and the faint smell of turmeric and cumin from a hastily eaten dinner, Julian Reyes was in a state of joyful chaos. Music pulsed through the rooms as he debated between 2 pairs of dress shoes, his suit already laid out on the bed with the reverence of a holy relic. It wasn't just a suit, it was a statement. A deep, passionate red velvet from Bode, its cut modern and slightly theatrical, designed to hug his frame and shimmer with a life of its own under the light. For Julian, the gala wasn't an obligation, it was the Super Bowl, the Met Gala, and the best party of the year all rolled into one. It was a chance to see everyone shine. The Lyra Grand Ballroom was a spectacle of icy elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting 1,000 points of light over a sea of black tie and designer gowns. The air hummed with the clink of champagne flutes and the low murmur of deal-making masquerading as small talk. Victor held court near the entrance, a fixed, polite smile on his face as he greeted board members and investors, his handshakes firm and brief. He had been there for an hour, his jaw already tight from the strain of feigning interest, when a ripple of energy passed through the crowd near the doors. A laugh cut through the polite chatter, a familiar, unfettered sound. Victor's head turned almost against his will. And there he was. Julian Reyes had arrived, and he didn't enter the room so much as ignite it. The red velvet suit was a shock of warmth against the cool palette of the ballroom. It did shimmer, catching the light with every movement, painting him in strokes of crimson and gold. It was audacious, it was brilliant, and it was, Victor had to admit with a sinking feeling in his stomach, utterly breathtaking. Julian moved through the crowd like a magnet, greeting colleagues with genuine warmth, his smile effortless. He was the human sun, and this glacial event was suddenly his solar system. Victor watched him for a long moment, a strange, tight feeling in his chest. Annoyance, he told himself. It was pure, unadulterated annoyance at such a flagrant disregard for sartorial subtlety. The evening wore on. Victor fulfilled his duties, moving from group to group, his Scotch glass never quite empty. He found himself, inevitably, drawn to the open bar, seeking a moment of respite. He was ordering another drink when he felt a presence beside him, a warmth that seemed to precede its owner. "Bit early for the hard stuff, isn't it, Mr. Hale? The shrimp puffs haven't even made their second round." Victor turned. Julian was leaning against the bar, a flute of champagne in his hand, his eyes bright with amusement. Up close, the suit was even more devastating. The velvet was lush, the color a deep wine that made Julian's skin glow. Victor had to consciously stop himself from staring. He defaulted to the safety of sarcasm, his voice a low murmur. "Try not to set the whole ballroom on fire in that suit, Reyes. The sprinkler system is notoriously sensitive." Julian's grin widened, utterly unoffended. He leaned in slightly, and Victor caught a hint of his cologne, something with sandalwood and orange blossom, warm and intriguing. "Coming from you? That's basically a Shakespearean sonnet," Julian beamed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Besides, a little fire might melt that perpetual frost you've got going on. It's a look, but it can't be good for your circulation." He tapped his champagne flute gently against Victor's tumbler with a soft clink. "Enjoy your scotch, boss. Try to have at least 1/5 the fun I'm going to have." And with another radiant smile, he was gone, weaving back into the crowd, leaving Victor standing at the bar, holding his drink and feeling, for the first time all evening, something other than bawd contempt. He felt challenged, seen, and it was as unnerving as it was electrifying. The Ice King took a long, slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes tracking the flash of red velvet across the room, a single, vibrant flaw in his perfectly frozen world. For Julian, the gala was a whirlwind of perfect moments. He'd danced with the interns, charmed the formidable head of finance into laughing at a joke about amortization, and successfully pitched a nascent idea to a key investor over canapes. Each triumph was celebrated with a fresh flute of champagne, passed to him by smiling waitstaff who seemed as caught up in his orbit as everyone else. The bubbles went straight to his head, fizzing through his veins and painting the world in a soft, golden, wonderfully optimistic glow. He was, as he happily informed his best friend Anya from PR during a brief pause near the dessert table, winning at life. Victor, meanwhile, had retreated to his preferred observation post, a secluded corner of the vast rooftop terrace, away from the thrum of the music and the crowd. The city stretched out before him, a grid of orderly lights, a landscape far easier to comprehend than the social complexities inside. He held a fresh glass of scotch, the ice cubes clinking a solitary, soothing rhythm. He was calculating the precise minute he could feasibly execute his escape when his solitude was breached. The approach was not subtle. There was a slight stumble on the paving stones, a muffled oop, and then a warm, solid weight bumped into his arm. Whoa! Hey! Solid wall. Very sturdy. Victor turned, and there was Julian. The brilliant, put-together marketer was gone, replaced by a thoroughly, delightfully drunk version. His red velvet jacket was unbuttoned, his curls were in a state of charming disarray, and his eyes were glassy with unfocused affection. He held a half-empty champagne flute perilously loose in his fingers. Reyes, Victor said, his voice its usual cool register, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from the man beside him. I think your public is inside. Julian blinked up at him, a slow, syrupy process. Nah, my public is everywhere. But right now, he poked Victor's arm with his free hand. Right now, my public is you. Boss man. Victor stiffened at the contact. You're intoxicated. I am sparkling, Julian corrected him with immense dignity, before his expression melted into something more contemplative. He swayed slightly on his feet, his brow furrowed as if working on a complex theorem. You know, I've been thinking that. A dangerous pastime, Victor murmured, but Julian was too far gone to hear the sarcasm. No, for real, Julian insisted, leaning in conspiratorially. The scent of champagne and orange blossom washed over Victor. I have a very important question. A business question. A life question. He paused for dramatic effect. You ever think about marrying someone who drives you absolutely, completely, bonkers? Victor's entire body went still. The noise of the party faded into a distant hum. He looked down at Julian, at his earnest, tipsy face, searching for a joke. He found none. Excuse me. The words were ice chips. You know, Julian slurred, gesturing vaguely with his glass, sloshing a little champagne onto the terrace. Like someone who's all whoosh. He made a wild, expansive gesture with his arms. And you're all blah. He stiffened his body into a perfect, serious statue, mimicking Victor's posture. And it shouldn't work. It should be a disaster. But it's not. It's fizz. He looked immensely pleased with this explanation. He poked Victor's arm again, this time with more purpose. Because I think I'd be a great husband. I'm supportive. I'd remember your birthday. I make a mean pancake. And I'm fun at parties. He gestured around them as evidence. Especially yours. Victor could only stare, his mind a perfect, stunned blank. This was not happening. This was a bizarre, champagne-induced hallucination. Julian, mistaking the silence for keen interest, nodded sagely. Just putting it out there. Into the universe. You know. He gave a wobbly, two-fingered salute, his smile soft and utterly sincere. Think about it. His mission apparently accomplished. He turned, weaved precariously for a moment, and then ambled off, drawn like a moth to the multitiered glow of the wedding-style cake. Victor stood frozen, his scotch forgotten in his hand. The ice in his glass had melted, diluting the amber liquid. He was aware of a single, persistent twitch in his left eyebrow, a tiny, frantic rebellion his body was staging against the sheer surrealism of the last 60 seconds. The Ice King had been offered a crown of sunshine and bubbles. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to respond. The first sensation was a jackhammer. Not a real one, but a brutal, rhythmic pounding that seemed to be located directly inside Julian's skull. The second sensation was a dry, desperate thirst, the kind that spoke of a profound internal desertification. The third was the slow, dawning, and utterly horrifying memory of the previous night. It didn't come all at once. It was a torturous trickle, a series of high-definition flashbacks that played behind his clenched eyelids as he lay motionless in his sunlit bedroom. The feel of cool velvet, the taste of champagne, the glittering ballroom. A good start. Victor Hale's icy expression at the bar. His own stupid, bravado-filled reply. Cringe, but survivable. Laughing with Anya. Dancing badly. The world feeling soft and golden. Still okay. The cool night air on the terrace. The solid, immovable wall of Victor Hale's presence. The feeling of poking a very expensive, very annoyed suit. Julian's eyes flew open. He winced against the assault of morning light. No, he whispered to his ceiling. No, no, no. But the memory, fully formed and monstrous, unspooled in his mind with merciless clarity. His own voice, slurred and earnest. You ever think about marrying someone who drives you absolutely, completely, bonkers? He let out a low groan and pulled a pillow over his face, as if he could suffocate the recollection. It didn't work. He saw Victor's frozen, unreadable face. He felt the triumphant, drunken certainty that he was being charming. Especially yours. With a Herculean effort, he rolled out of bed. His body protested every movement. In the harsh light of his bathroom, he looked pale, haunted. His vibrant red suit was a discarded heap of shame on a chair. He clutched the edge of the sink, staring at his reflection, the architect of his own professional ruin. The commute to the Lyra Tower was a walk of shame stretched over 20 city blocks. Every ray of sunshine felt accusatory. He'd called in a desperate emergency order to the best coffee shop near the office, and now he clutched the large iced coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to this mortal plane. The caffeine was a lifeline, the cold was a penance. He didn't go to his desk. He went straight to the one sanctuary that might understand, the PR pit, and specifically, the desk of Anya Sharma, his best friend and keeper of all his secrets. He collapsed into the guest chair opposite her, sliding the iced coffee onto her desk with a thud. He dropped his forehead onto the cool surface with a dull moan. Anya, impeccably dressed and already on her third coffee, didn't look up from her screen. Rough night? I saw you conquering the dance floor around hour 3. It was inspirational. Julian's voice was muffled by the desk. Anya. What's up, Jules? You look like you got run over by a party bus. Which, to be fair. He lifted his head, his eyes wide with genuine horror. Anya. I did something catastrophic. This got her attention. She finally looked at him, her professional calm giving way to curiosity. Catastrophic how? Did you accidentally pledge our entire Q4 budget to a mariachi band? Because I could spin that. Worse, he whispered, leaning forward. I found Victor. On the terrace. He was all broody and Scotch-y. Anya's eyebrows inched upward. Okay. And I, Julian swallowed, the memory making him feel faint. I told him I thought I'd be a great husband. Especially his. The silence that followed was absolute. Anya's fingers stilled over her keyboard. Her expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning, horrified amusement. Her lips started to twitch. You did not. I did, he confirmed, his voice a hollow echo. I poked him. I saluted him. I think I called him boss man. He buried his face in his hands. I told Victor Hale I want to be his husband. I need a new job. Or a time machine. Or a witness protection program that relocates me to a remote island where they've never heard of media conglomerates or beautifully tailored suits. Anya finally let out a sound, a choked snort that quickly evolved into full-bodied, helpless laughter. She had to put her hand over her mouth to stifle it. Oh, Jules. Oh, my God. The Ice King. You proposed to the Ice King. It wasn't a proposal, he hissed, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. It was a strategic suggestion. A hypothetical. A champagne-fueled act of career suicide. What did he say? Anya asked, her eyes sparkling with gleeful horror. Nothing. He just stood there. He had this look, like a scientist who'd just discovered a new, profoundly stupid species of bug. My eyebrow was twitching. I think his eyebrow was twitching. It was a mutual twitch of utter despair. He slumped back in the chair, the plastic groaning under his weight. He's going to fire me. Today. He's probably up there right now, drafting the termination papers himself. Dear Mr. Reyes, while your marketing strategies have been sparkly, your matrimonial aspirations are not a fit for the company's strategic direction. He took a long, desperate pull from his iced coffee. I'm dead. I'm so dead. Anya wiped a tear of laughter from her eye. Well, on the bright side, if you get fired, you'll have plenty of free time to plan the wedding. Julian just groaned, sliding so far down in the chair he was nearly horizontal, a man utterly defeated by the ghost of champagne past. The morning passed with the agonizing slowness of a glacier calving a canyon. Every ping from his computer, every footstep in the hallway outside his office, every ring of his phone sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Julian's system. He was a condemned man waiting for the warden's footfall. He'd barricaded himself in his office, the blinds partially drawn. The vibrant, quirky space, decorated with vintage movie posters and a thriving collection of succulents, felt like a gaudy tomb. He jumped when his intern, Maya, popped her head in to ask a question about the Metro campaign. "Jules, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just Q2 projections," he lied, his voice strained. "They are terrifying. Carry on." He couldn't focus. He opened a spreadsheet and stared at the numbers until they blurred into a meaningless gray soup. All he could see was Victor's frozen face on the terrace. The memory played on a loop, each time feeling more cringeworthy, more fatal. "Especially yours." He groaned aloud and dropped his head into his hands. What had he been thinking? The champagne had vaporized every last shred of his common sense. He was a professional. He ran a multimillion-dollar division. And he'd propositioned his CEO like a drunk extra in a rom-com. At 11:47 a.m., his personal phone buzzed. A text from Anya. "Anya, any sign of the executioner? I've got a bet going with legal. I said he'd do it via a formal memo CC'd to HR. Julian typed back with trembling fingers. "Julian, nothing. The silence is worse. It's like he's sharpening the axe slowly. Anya, maybe he forgot. He was drinking scotch. Maybe he blacked out. We can pray." Julian didn't dare to hope. Victor Hale did not forget. Victor Hale's mind was a steel trap, and Julian had willingly stuck his head in it. Noon came and went. Julian's stomach was a knot of anxiety. The thought of food was nauseating. He sipped water, trying to stave off both his hangover and his impending doom. He was just considering the merits of drafting his resignation letter preemptively. Maybe it would spare him the humiliation of being fired. When he saw him. Through the slats of his blinds, a figure of impeccable black wool appeared, moving down the hallway with a purposeful, familiar stride. Julian's heart stopped, then hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The axe was falling. He braced himself, sitting up straight in his chair, trying to muster a shred of dignity. He expected the door to swing open, for Victor to stand there, cold and imposing, with a security guard and a cardboard box. But the knock was quiet, almost tentative. 2 soft raps on the glass. Julian's breath hitched. "Come in," he managed, his voice cracking. The door opened slowly. Victor Hale stood on the threshold. He was, as always, flawlessly dressed, his expression unreadable. But he wasn't empty-handed. In his hand was a bouquet. Not a generic corporate gift basket. A real, breathtaking bouquet of pristine white lilies, their petals waxy and perfect, their scent already beginning to fill the room with a sweet, funereal fragrance. They were elegant, severe, and utterly Victor. Julian could only stare, his brain short-circuiting. Flowers? Was he being fired with flowers? Was this some kind of bizarre corporate kindness? A parting gift? Victor stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind him with a soft click. The sound was deafening in the silence. He looked around the space, his gaze taking in the movie posters, the yellow blazer hanging on the back of the door, the messy desk. His eyes finally landed on Julian, pale and wide-eyed in his chair. Victor's voice was flat, measured, as if he were stating a minor correction to a financial report. It held none of the warmth of the champagne-soaked night before. "I've given your proposal considerable thought since last night." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. So he remembered. Every humiliating word. Victor paused, his icy eyes fixed on Julian. He seemed to be choosing his words with immense care. "I've concluded that I am not prepared to enter into a matrimonial arrangement at this time." Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was being let down gently after a drunk marriage proposal. This was a new circle of hell Dante hadn't even imagined. But then Victor took another step forward and placed the bouquet of lilies carefully on the edge of Julian's desk, right beside a stressed-looking succulent. The contrast was jarring. "However," Victor continued, his voice dropping just a fraction, losing some of its corporate edge and gaining something else. Something more personal. "I found the sentiment behind it intriguing, and I have been unable to stop thinking about it. Or you." Julian's brain finally rebooted, but it was glitching badly. Intriguing? Unable to stop thinking. These were not words in the Victor Hale vocabulary. Victor's gaze was intense, pinning Julian to his chair. "Your confession, while unprofessional and deeply inappropriate, was singular. It lacked the guile I am accustomed to." It was, I believe, genuine. He clasped his hands behind his back, every inch the CEO, even as he delivered a line that belonged in a screenplay. Therefore, I am counter-proposing. I am not ready to get married, but I am willing to explore that our intrigue. So, how about a date instead? The silence in the room was absolute. Julian could hear the faint hum of his computer, the distant whir of the vac, the frantic beating of his own heart. He was certain he was hallucinating. This had to be a champagne-fueled dream. His jaw had gone completely slack. He blinked, once, twice, trying to process the words. A date, he finally stammered. With you. A flicker of something, amusement, annoyance, passed through Victor's eyes. Is there another CEO you drunkenly proposed to last night that I should be aware of? No. I mean, yes. I mean. Julian shook his head, trying to clear it. You're serious? Victor's lips tightened into a thin line. He looked, for the first time since entering, almost uncomfortable. Dangerously so, he stated, the words a low, serious vow. Friday, 8 p.m. I'll text you the address. It will be quiet. Where something less incendiary. And without another word, he gave a curt nod, turned on his heel, and left, closing the door softly behind him. Julian sat frozen, staring at the closed door, then at the stunning, severe white lilies on his desk. Their sweet scent now seemed not funereal, but electric, dizzying. The world had just flipped on its axis. The Ice King had not come to fire him. He had come to ask him out. The 48 hours between Victor's office proposition and Friday at 8 p.m. were a masterclass in anxiety. Julian's emotions cycled through sheer terror, giddy disbelief, and a paralyzing fear that he had, in fact, dreamt the entire thing. He must have checked his phone 100 times, half expecting a text from Victor that read, "Disregard my previous offer. You're fired. Regards, VH." But no such text came. Instead, at 6:01 p.m. on Friday, a single, impeccably punctuated message arrived. Unknown number. The address is 72B, atop the Lauron Hotel. The reservation is under Hale. 8 p.m. No hello. No looking forward to it. Just the facts. It was so quintessentially Victor that Julian felt a strange surge of relief. This was actually happening. Then the panic set in. Where something less incendiary. Victor's words echoed in his mind. Julian stood before his bursting closet, a critic of his own flamboyant wardrobe. The yellow blazer? Too much. The pineapple shirt? Absolutely not. The forest green trousers? He might as well wear a sign that said "I'm trying too hard." He settled on a teal blazer, a concession to his own spirit, but in a more subdued wool blend instead of velvet or satin. Underneath, a simple black crew neck. The trousers were dark, well-fitted denim. It was, for him, practically funereal. He fussed with his curls in the mirror, trying to tame them into something that said charming date and not eccentric artist having a breakdown. Meanwhile, in a penthouse apartment that resembled a high-end architectural digest spread, Victor Hale was also engaged in a silent battle with his own reflection. His version of what to wear was simpler. He owned 15 variations of the same outfit. He chose a black cashmere sweater and black trousers. It was what he always wore. It was armor. But as he stood there, adjusting his cufflinks, a rare and unwelcome sensation took hold, nerves. He was a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Why was the prospect of a dinner conversation with Julian Reyes making his palms feel damp? He rehearsed questions in his head. How was your week? The campaign metrics were impressive. It sounded like a performance review. He scowled at his reflection. This was a mistake. The Lauron's rooftop restaurant, Cielo, was everything Julian had feared and Victor had banked on, hushed, sophisticated, and intimidatingly quiet. The tables were spaced for privacy, the lighting was low and flattering, and the waitstaff moved with a silent, graceful efficiency. The view of the city was breathtaking, but it felt like dining in a museum. Victor was already there, of course, seated at a prime table, a glass of mineral water in front of him. He looked like a panther that had been artfully arranged in a chic jungle, beautiful, powerful, and completely out of place amidst the soft chatter of other couples. Julian was led to the table by a maître d', who seemed to disapprove of his shoes. "Mr. Hale," Julian said, his voice sounding too loud in the sacred space. Victor looked up. His gaze did a quick, analytical sweep of Julian's outfit, and Julian saw the faintest hint of approval. Or was it just the absence of disapproval? "Julian, you on time?" "Wouldn't dream of being late to a business meeting," Julian quipped, sliding into the chair opposite him. The table felt miles wide. Victor's lips twitched. This isn't a business meeting. Could have fooled me. The silence is contractual. A waiter appeared, saving them. They ordered drinks, a Pinot Noir for Julian, another mineral water for Victor. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The lilies were unexpected, Julian ventured, desperate to break the ice. And beautiful. Thank you. Victor nodded once. They seemed appropriate. They are known for their purity of form. Right. Not a single emoji in sight, Julian said, then immediately wanted to kick himself under the table. Victor stared at him. Julian braced for a cutting remark. Instead, Victor said, a relief. It was almost dryly humorous. Julian felt a sliver of hope. Their drinks arrived. Julian, nervous, reached for his wine glass just as Victor moved his water glass. Julian's hand fumbled, knocking his own full glass of Pinot Noir. It tipped in horrifying slow motion, a deep crimson wave sloshing over the side, onto the stark white tablecloth, and directly onto Julian's lap. Oh, God! No, Julian gasped, jumping back as the cold wine seeped through his trousers. The waiter was there in an instant with a stack of napkins, but the damage was done. A large, ugly purple stain bloomed on his thigh. He was mortified. This was a disaster. He was a walking, talking catastrophe. He looked up at Victor, expecting to see icy contempt, the final confirmation that this had been a terrible idea. But Victor wasn't looking at the stain. He was looking at Julian's face, at his expression of utter horror. And something unexpected happened. A low, soft sound escaped him. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close. A faint, genuine amusement warmed his wintry eyes. Well, Victor said, his voice devoid of its usual chill. That's one way to make an impression. The tension shattered. Julian started laughing, a slightly hysterical, relieved sound. I'm so sorry. I've ruined the tablecloth. I've ruined my pants. I've probably ruined the evening. Victor watched him, a real, unforced smirk playing on his lips. It's a tablecloth. They'll wash it. He gestured for the waiter. Perhaps we could move to the bar area. It's less formal. As they were reseated at a quieter, darker corner of the bar, where a few other patrons were laughing and the atmosphere was noticeably looser, Julian finally found his courage. He looked at Victor, who was still watching him with that unfamiliar glint of amusement. So, Julian said, leaning forward, do you glare at all your dates like you're planning their funeral, or am I special? Victor's smirk widened into something that could almost, nearly, be called a smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger, softer. You're special, he said, and the way he said it, low and with a hint of a tease, made Julian's stomach flip. The Ice King had cracked. Just a little. And for the first time that night, Julian felt like he could finally breathe. The first date, for all its initial stumbles, became a door cracked open. Then another. And another. What followed was a careful, tentative, and utterly fascinating exploration. The man who ran his life like a precision timepiece was suddenly, willingly, allowing a chaotic, colorful cuckoo into the mechanism. Their dates were a study in contrasts. Victor preferred curated experiences, private viewings at art galleries after hours, reservations at exclusive, whisper-quiet restaurants where the chefs personally presented each course. Julian dragged him to crowded food truck festivals, indie rock concerts in sweaty, packed clubs, and once, to a disastrously fun mini-golf course where Victor's competitive streak emerged with terrifying focus. Victor learned to navigate Julian's world. He learned that "I'll be ready in 5 minutes" actually meant 4 to 5, and that those 4 to 5 minutes would be filled with Julian frantically trying to decide between 3 equally loud shirts while explaining the entire history of a marketing campaign. Victor, who was always precisely 15 minutes early for everything, would stand in Julian's vibrant, cluttered apartment, sipping a glass of water and feeling a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. He began to see the method in the madness. The vibrant shirts were armor, just as his own black sweaters were. Julian, in turn, was granted access to the inner sanctum. He discovered that Victor Hale's penthouse, while stunningly minimalist, was not devoid of personality. It was just hidden, like a secret code. One rainy Friday night, trapped indoors by a sudden downpour, Julian was perusing the single, sleek bookshelf he'd initially dismissed as decorative. Among the business biographies and financial texts, he found a collection of DVDs. Not Blu-rays, but old, lovingly kept DVDs. Les Enfants du Paradis. Julian asked, pulling out the case. Breathless? Victor Hale, you are a closet French New Wave cinephile. Victor, who was in the kitchen attempting to make them tea, stiffened slightly. I appreciate the formalism, he said, a defensive edge in his voice. Julian grinned. You're a romantic. A grumpy, black-wearing romantic who likes tragic, beautiful people smoking cigarettes in black and white. Victor didn't deny it. He just brought over 2 mugs of tea. That night, they watched Jules at gym, and Julian saw a different Victor, one completely engrossed, his sharp features softened in the blue light of the screen, pointing out camera techniques in a low, passionate voice Julian had never heard before. Another revelation came in the form of baked goods. Julian had made an offhand comment about missing his abuela's conscious. The following Sunday morning, he arrived at Victor's to find the sterile, stainless steel kitchen dusted with flour. Victor, wearing a pristine apron over his usual black shirt and trousers, was pulling a perfect tray of golden, sugar-crusted conchas from the oven. Julian's jaw dropped. What? How? Victor avoided his gaze, looking suddenly self-conscious. The recipe seemed straightforward. The precision of baking is satisfying. They were the best conchas Julian had ever had outside of his grandmother's kitchen. He learned that Victor's obsession with crossword puzzles was not an idle pastime but a daily ritual performed with a fountain pen, and he never cheated. Julian started saving the hardest ones from the newspaper to bring over, and they would sit in comfortable silence, Victor's brow furrowed in concentration, Julian doodling in the margins, throwing out increasingly ridiculous answers just to make him sigh. The office became a secret playground. They mastered the art of the loaded glance in Monday meetings. Julian would pitch a ludicrous idea with a straight face just to see the minute twitch at the corner of Victor's mouth. They developed a silent language. A raised eyebrow from Victor meant wrap it up. A subtle tap of Julian's pen meant this is boring, save me. But the best moments were the stolen ones. The quick, breathless kisses in the elevator, the second before the doors slid open on a busy floor. The way Victor's hand would find the small of Julian's back in a crowded company function, a secret brand of ownership and support. The time Julian got caught working late and Victor, instead of leaving, sat on the edge of his desk, listening to him vent about a difficult client, before quietly saying, "Fire them. We don't need the business." It was the most outrageous, supportive thing Julian had ever heard. The Ice King was melting, and in his place was a man of surprising depth and dry wit. Julian discovered that Victor's sarcasm wasn't meant to wound, but to tease. That his quietness wasn't coldness, but a tendency to observe and listen deeply. That his meticulous nature expressed itself not just in spreadsheets, but in the perfect foam on a cappuccino he made for Julian, or the way he remembered Julian's favorite brand of ginger ale. And Victor, in turn, found himself disarmed. Julian's chaos was not incompetence, but a different kind of intelligence, associative, intuitive, brilliant. His warmth wasn't naivete, but a profound strength. He didn't just fill the silence, he made the silence feel empty by comparison. They were lying on Victor's couch one night, a tangle of limbs, an old movie playing unnoticed on the screen. Julian's head was on Victor's chest, listening to the steady, solid rhythm of his heart. "You know," Julian murmured, tracing a pattern on Victor's sweater, "for a guy who claims to hate sparkle, you put up with an awful lot of it." Victor's hand, which had been absently carding through Julian's curls, stilled. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't put up with it," he said, his voice a low rumble under Julian's ear. "I enjoy it. It's illuminating." Julian lifted his head to look at him. In the dim light, Victor's face was open, unguarded. The admission was huge. It was a surrender. It was, Julian realized, the closest Victor Hale might ever get to writing a sonnet. He smiled, soft and sure, and leaned up to kiss him. The Ice King had thawed, and the landscape he revealed was more beautiful than Julian could have ever imagined. The campaign for Viridian Tech, Lyra's newest and most important client, was a beast. It was a comprehensive, multi-platform launch that demanded innovation and flawless execution. Julian and his team had been burning the midnight oil for weeks, fueled by cold brew, passion, and a seemingly endless supply of ideas. They had landed on a concept they called the Viridian Verse, an immersive, interactive digital ecosystem that was bold, boundary-pushing, and, in Julian's eyes, a surefire winner. He'd mentioned the broad strokes to Victor in passing, over dinner. Victor, ever the strategist, had listened, nodded, and said, "Ensure the data supports the level of investment. Run the projections and get them to me by Thursday." But in the whirlwind of creative fervor, Thursday came and went. The projections were a work in progress, a complex model his analytics lead was still fine-tuning. The idea, however, was fully formed, brilliant, and ready to be unleashed. Which is how Julian found himself in the Monday morning executive strategy meeting, not on the agenda, but buzzing with an energy he couldn't contain. The Viridian executives were in the room, along with Victor, the heads of every division, and the entire board. It was the perfect audience. When there was a lull in the conversation about Q4 financials, Julian saw his opening. "Actually, if I could just jump in for a moment," he said, his voice bright with excitement. "The team has been working on something for Viridian that I think is truly revolutionary, and I'd love to share the energy." Victor, seated at the head of the table, looked up from his notes. His expression was neutral, but there was a question in his eyes. Julian hadn't told him about this. Before Victor could speak, Julian was on his feet, clicking his laptop to the main screen. The vibrant, dynamic slides of the Viridian verse lit up the room. For 10 glorious minutes, Julian was in his element. He was passionate, funny, and utterly convincing. He painted a picture of a campaign that would not just advertise a product but create a cultural moment. The Viridian executives were leaning forward, nodding, smiling. The board members looked impressed. The room was electric with his vision. He finished to a round of enthusiastic applause. He beamed, catching Victor's eye, expecting to see a flicker of pride, or at least acknowledgement of the win. Victor's face was a mask of carved ice. He did not clap. His hands were steepled in front of his mouth, his eyes narrowed to slits. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Thank you for that energetic presentation, Julian," Victor said, his voice dangerously calm. "A fascinating concept. We will, of course, need to review the full business case, risk assessment, and financial projections before any further discussion. Let's return to the Q4 agenda." The meeting stumbled forward, but the energy was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Julian sat down, his own excitement evaporating, replaced by a cold dread. He had miscalculated. Badly. The second the meeting adjourned, Victor's voice cut through the chatter, low and sharp. "Julian. My office. Now." The walk to the penthouse office was the longest of Julian's life. Victor held the door open for him and closed it with a soft, definitive click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, his knuckles pressed white against the pale wood. "What?" Victor began, his voice a low, controlled whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. "Was that?" "It was the Viridian pitch," Julian said, his own defensiveness rising to mask his fear. "They loved it. Did you see their faces? We nailed it." "You nailed nothing." Victor snapped, the control finally breaking. "You blindsided me. You presented a half-baked, multimillion-dollar idea without a shred of supporting data to the entire board and our most important client. You made a spectacle of yourself and this company." "Half-baked? It's genius and you know it." Julian fired back, hurt fueling his anger. "I thought you'd be proud. I thought you'd see that my team is capable of more than just the safe, boring plays you always default to." The words hung in the air, cruel and unintended. Victor flinched as if struck. The anger in his eyes cooled into something harder, more distant. "This is not about safe or boring," Victor said, each word precise and icy. "This is about trust. And protocol. I am the CEO. You are the head of marketing. You do not launch strategic missiles without the launch codes. You especially do not do it in a forum where my authority, and my ability to manage risk, is on display for everyone to see. So this is about your ego." Julian shot back, though he knew, deep down, Victor was right. "This is about the fact that I need to be able to trust you." Victor's voice rose, echoing in the spacious office. "I need to trust that you will communicate with me, that you will not recklessly gamble this company's reputation and our biggest client on a flashy presentation and a hope. What if they had asked for the numbers? What would you have shown them? A pretty graph and a wish." The fight drained out of Julian, leaving behind the cold, hard truth. Victor wasn't angry about the idea. He was angry about the betrayal. The silence that fell between them was heavy and awful. "Get out," Victor said finally, turning his back to look out at the city. "We're done here." Julian left, his heart a lead weight in his chest. The rest of the day was a blur of misery. He avoided his team, too ashamed to face them. Anya brought him a coffee and didn't say a word, just patted his shoulder. At 8 p.m., Julian was still at his desk, staring blankly at his screen, when his phone buzzed. My penthouse. Now. It wasn't a request. Julian's stomach twisted. Was this it? Was he being fired after all? He took the private elevator up, his mind racing. He found Victor not in his office, but on the living room terrace. The city sprawled below them. Victor had changed into a simple black sweater and trousers. 2 glasses of red wine sat on the railing. He handed one to Julian without a word. They stood in silence for a long moment, the chill night air a stark contrast to the heat of their earlier argument. I was proud, Victor said quietly, not looking at him. The idea is exceptional. It's the kind of innovative thinking I hired you for. Julian blinked, stunned. Then why? Because you didn't trust me enough to show me first, Victor interrupted, his voice weary. You went for the applause of a room instead of the approval of your partner. And in doing so, you made us both look weak. Me, for being out of the loop. You, for being impulsive. Julian looked down into his wine glass. There was no defense. I got carried away. I saw the opportunity and I took it. I wanted to prove to you, to everyone, that I could win them over. You don't need to prove anything to me, Victor said, finally turning to look at him. His expression was no longer angry, but raw, vulnerable. I already know what you're capable of. What I need is to know that we're a team. That we're in lockstep. That you won't blindside me again. The word we hung in the air between them. It was the most important word Victor had ever said to him. I'm sorry, Julian said, the words feeling inadequate but utterly sincere. You're right. It was a stupid, reckless thing to do. I was so focused on the idea, I forgot about the partnership. Victor nodded, accepting the apology. He took a sip of his wine. The projections. How bad are they? Julian winced. The initial model shows a high upfront cost with a long ROI horizon. It's risky. Victor was silent for a moment, processing. We'll work on it together tomorrow. We'll find a way to phase it, to mitigate the risk. The idea is too good to discard. But we do it properly. Together. The relief that washed over Julian was so profound it left him weak. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a chance. It was the hard, unglamorous work of building something real. Together, Julian agreed, his voice thick with emotion. They clinked glasses, the sound a quiet promise in the dark. The trouble in paradise hadn't destroyed them. It had, for the first time, truly forced them to build a foundation stronger than sparkle and stronger than ice. 6 months had passed since the Viridian incident. The campaign, after being meticulously refined and scaled into a phased, data-supported rollout, had been a resounding success. It had, as Julian predicted, become a cultural touchstone, and Lyra Media's stock price had enjoyed a significant, sustained climb. The conflict had become a foundational story for them, a lesson in trust and collaboration that had forged their professional relationship into something unbreakable. Personally, they had found a rhythm, a comfortable, deeply felt syncopation between Julian's vibrant spontaneity and Victor's grounded stability. They were a unit. On this particular evening, the city was painted in the lavish golds and deep purples of a late summer sunset. Victor had suggested a drink at Cielo, the site of their first disastrous date. It felt like coming full circle. They stood at the very railing where Julian, champagne-drunk and brave, had upended both their lives. The memory was no longer a cringeworthy horror but a cherished, fond joke between them. Julian leaned his elbows on the cool metal, looking out at the view, then sideways at Victor. The fading sun gilded Victor's sharp profile, softening his edges, making him look like a statue warmed by a gentle light. A playful, tender smile touched Julian's lips. He nudged Victor's side with his elbow. So, he said, his voice light with affection. Still not ready to marry me? Victor let out a long, melodramatic groan, the sound so utterly Victor-like that it made Julian's heart squeeze. He uncrossed his arms from where they were folded over his chest, a familiar defensive posture that now seemed more habit than genuine barrier. You are, Victor grumbled, though there was no heat in it, only a deep, fond exasperation, the most impossible man on the planet. He turned to face Julian fully, his winter-sea eyes capturing the last of the sunset's fire. I had a plan. A whole sequence of events. I was going to ask you this time. But no, you had to go and ruin my moment. Again. You and your pathological need to be first. Julian's breath caught in his throat. The playful tease evaporated, replaced by a stunning, seismic shock. His eyes widened, his playful grin fading into a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. You, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. You are going to propose to me." The tips of Victor's ears turned a faint, undeniable pink. He looked away, back over the city, his jaw working. He was flustered. Actually, genuinely flustered. It was the most beautiful thing Julian had ever seen. "The concept had crossed my mind," Victor muttered, his tone attempting its usual dryness and failing spectacularly. "Eventually. Someday. Maybe." He shoved his hands into his pockets, a rare gesture of uncertainty. It required a certain ambience. A specific vintage of wine. A guarantee you wouldn't spill it. A 5-year business plan. Julian didn't let him finish. He laughed, a sound of pure, incandescent joy that seemed to catch the last of the sunlight and hold it. He reached out, turning Victor to face him, his hands on Victor's arms. "You are going to propose with a business plan." A financial forecast was involved, yes, Victor said, trying and failing to maintain his grumpy facade. A tiny, reluctant smile was tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was very thorough. It outlined the long-term IOI of a merged asset portfolio and joint venture. Julian beamed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, shining with unshed tears of happiness. He leaned in, closing the space between them, and kissed his grumpy, meticulous, utterly perfect CEO right on the lips. It was a kiss that tasted of scotch and promise and a future he could finally, clearly see. When they parted, Victor's expression had softened completely. The Ice King was gone, melted away by the setting sun and the man in his arms. In his place was just Victor, a man who baked conscious, loved old movies, and had drafted a financial forecast for a marriage proposal. "You," Julian whispered, his forehead resting against Victor's, "are adorable when you're annoyed." Victor finally cracked. A real, full, unguarded smile broke across his face, transforming it entirely. It was a smile few people ever saw, and it was reserved only for Julian. It was soft, and it was completely, utterly in love. "And you," Victor countered, his voice low and intimate, "are infuriatingly charming when you're right." They stayed like that, wrapped in the golden hour glow, hands linked together on the railing. The city below them began to sparkle with early evening lights, a galaxy of possibilities mirroring the ones that now stretched out before them. The maybes and somedays that had once felt like distant, theoretical concepts now felt like inevitabilities. There were no rings, no vows, not yet. But there was a certainty in the way their fingers intertwined, a silent pact that was stronger than any business plan. They had all the time in the world to get it right. Together. Epilogue. 3 years later. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and brilliant over the Vermont countryside. The Lyra media team, along with a select group of friends and family, had taken over a stunning, rustic chic barn venue nestled in the rolling green hills. Strings of delicate fairy lights were being woven through wooden beams, and vast arrangements of white lilies and sunflowers, a perfect fusion of their styles, adorned every surface. In the groom's suite, chaos reigned, but it was a happy, vibrant chaos. Julian, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo of deep burgundy velvet, a nod to the suit that started it all, was pacing. "I can't find the vows. I had them on index cards. Sparkle-themed index cards, Anya. They had little gold stars on them," he exclaimed, frantically patting down his pockets. Anya, his best woman, looking formidable and elegant in a sharp tuxedo dress, calmly held up a stack of cards. "You gave them to me for safekeeping an hour ago, you gorgeous disaster. Breathe. Your makeup is impeccable and we can't have you sweating it off." Across the hall, in the other groom's suite, the atmosphere was one of serene, focused silence. Victor stood perfectly still as his tailor made one final, infinitesimal adjustment to the lapel of his classic black tuxedo. His best man, Charles, his stoic CFO and perhaps his only friend before Julian, stood by with a glass of water. "Nervous?" Charles asked, his voice even. Victor's eyes, a warm gray today, met his in the mirror. "No," he said, and it was the truth. There was a profound calm in his center. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He allowed himself a small, private smile. "I am, however, moderately terrified that Julian has somehow arranged for a surprise flash mob during the ceremony." Charles almost smiled. "I have security on standby for exactly that contingency." The ceremony was set for sunset in a clearing behind the barn, overlooking a vast, placid lake. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and an arch woven with more lilies and sunflowers stood waiting. As the guests took their seats, a string quartet began to play a soft, modern rendition of a classical piece. The music shifted, and a hush fell over the crowd. Everyone stood. From one side of the clearing, Victor appeared, walking with Charles. He looked like a fairy tale prince, his sharp features softened by emotion, his posture straight and proud. His eyes scanned the crowd briefly before fixing on the flower-strewn path where Julian would appear. The usual ice in his gaze had melted into a pool of pure, anticipatory love. Then, the quartet swelled into a beautiful, heartfelt rendition of Here Comes the Sun. And there he was. Julian, on the arm of his beaming mother, was a vision of radiant joy. The burgundy velvet glowed in the golden hour light. His curls were perfectly, artfully unruly. But it was his smile, wide and trembling with happy tears, that captivated everyone. He didn't look at the guests. His eyes, shining, were locked on Victor from the first moment. As he walked down the aisle, he passed the rows of their colleagues. The stern head of finance discreetly dabbed her eyes. His entire marketing team were unabashedly weeping with joy. Anya, already standing at the front, gave him a fierce, proud wink. He reached the arch, and his mother kissed his cheek, placing his hand in Victor's. The moment their hands touched, a visible, almost electric current of peace and rightness passed between them. Julian's nervous energy stilled. Victor's formal posture relaxed. They simply gazed at each other, lost in their own world. The officiant, a warm-faced woman who had become a friend, began to speak. She talked about love that surprises us, that challenges us, and how the most beautiful partnerships are often built between two seemingly opposite souls who find their perfect balance. Then it was time for the vows. Victor went first. He pulled a single, crisp note card from his pocket. His hands were steady, but his voice, when he began to speak, was thick with an emotion few had ever heard from him. "Julian," he began, looking directly into Julian's tear-filled eyes. "You once asked me if I ever thought about marrying someone who drives me insane." A soft ripple of laughter went through the crowd. "I didn't have an answer then. I do now. I want to marry you because you drive me insane. You are the glorious, beautiful, chaotic disruption I never knew my life needed." He took a steadying breath. "You brought color into my monochrome world. You brought laughter into my silence. You taught me that a spreadsheet can't predict joy, and that the best ideas sometimes come on sparkly index cards." He paused, his own eyes glistening. "You are the human sun, and I promise to spend the rest of my life standing in your light, learning from your warmth, and being the steady ground for you to dance upon. I vow to always save you a seat at the quiet table, to always share my crossword puzzle, and to love you, exactly as you are, forever." A collective, soft sigh came from the audience. Julian was openly crying, a beautiful, happy smile on his face. Now it was his turn. He pulled out his stack of starry index cards, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at them, then back at Victor, and with a watery laugh, he tucked them away into his pocket. "I memoized them anyway," he whispered, earning another laugh from their guests. He took both of Victor's hands in his. "Victor," he said, his voice clear and full of love. "My Ice King. You once told me my proposal lacked guile. Well, this one has 3 years of intention behind it." He smiled. "You are the most infuriating, meticulous, brilliant man I have ever known. You have a 5-year plan for everything. Except, I think, for me. And I love that I am the beautiful, chaotic variable in your perfectly ordered universe." He squeezed Victor's hands. "You are my rock, my safe harbor, the person who sees my wildest ideas and doesn't shut them down, but helps me build a foundation under them. You are the quiet to my noise, the calm to my storm. I vow to never stop trying to make you laugh, to always spill a little wine on your pristine tablecloths, and to love you with a loyalty and fierceness that would impress even your most detailed financial forecast. I choose you, every day, for all of my days." There wasn't a dry eye in the clearing. Victor, usually so composed, had a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The officiant beamed. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss your husband." They didn't need to be told twice. Victor cupped Julian's face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and Julian leaned into him. Their kiss was not a chaste peck for an audience. It was a slow, deep, passionate promise, filled with 3 years of history and a lifetime of hope. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The reception that followed was a perfect fusion of their worlds. The barn was elegantly decorated, with long farm tables covered in crisp white linens and fine china, Victor's influence, but the centerpieces were bursts of wild, colorful flowers, and the dance floor was already packed with laughing, dancing guests, Julian's doing. The speeches were roasts filled with love. Anya told the story of the drunk proposal, to uproarious laughter. Charles, to everyone's shock, delivered a surprisingly witty speech that ended with, "I've never seen a merger with such a favorable long-term ROI." But the highlight was their first dance. They moved together to a slow, soulful version of "You Are the Sunshine of My Life," Victor's hand resting firmly on Julian's lower back, Julian's head tucked against Victor's shoulder. They swayed, whispering to each other, laughing softly, completely unaware of anyone else. Later, as Julian was pulled into a conga line by his marketing team, Victor stood at the edge of the dance floor, a glass of champagne in hand, a rare indulgence. He watched his husband, a man of pure, unadulterated joy, and felt a love so vast it was almost overwhelming. Julian caught his eye from across the room, mid-dance move, and blew him a kiss. Victor, the Ice King, the man of shadows and silence, caught it and pressed it to his own lips, his smile brighter than all the fairy lights in the room. It wasn't a quiet, orderly future. It would be loud and messy, and filled with yellow blazes and spilled wine and sparkly index cards. It would be a lifetime of beautiful, glorious chaos. And for the first time, Victor Hale couldn't wait.